I think what you have said repeatedly in different dimensions. We talk about migration, we talk about COVID, we talk about economy, we talk about conflicts in the south, impeding essential flows to Europe, making our life more difficult as tourists, etc., etc. All of these things are things that have something to do with the EU and have something to do with Europe. There are many of them too big for Sweden to handle on its own in its bilateral relationship to Turkey. Of course, when the Swedish foreign minister recently visited her Turkish counterpart, she did so not in a primarily Swedish capacity, but as incoming chairperson of the OSCE. So clearly, there is always a wider context in which Sweden and even the EU has to act in order to protect its interests. So, what would you say is when we talk about bringing the issue back to the compass needle that you saw we put on the cover of our book? I mean, indicated that we have to be aware that Swedish and European security is not just an issue of East-West. It's a combination of North-South and East-West. What is the single most important set of decisions that European leaders need to focus on in the coming months in order to manage, not solve, but manage the Turkish variable?
I think you put it well when you said manage, not solve, but manage, because this is within the realm of the achievable to find ways to solve things. I can compare by again referring to the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, because Nagorno-Karabakh was a key example of a frozen conflict, so-called. You don't solve things, but you freeze it. And many have been saying, by the way, about Syria as a whole, or at least parts of Syria, that the best case there is for those conflicts to be frozen, because then it means at least having some breathing space. But as you and I know from historic examples, freezing something is not solving something. And in the case, but it can be that freezing is the best option that one has compared to what would otherwise be open conflict, which is doing a lot of harm per definition. So it's not easy to say what would be, because the problem is that it's very hard to find consensus between EU countries and also between the EU as collectivity and Turkey on the terms for an agreement of a strategic relationship. If to the extent that the consensus within the EU would be to offer Turkey a strategic relationship, preferred, whatever you call it, but short of the perspective of membership, it would be rejected angrily, not only by the Turkish regime for prestige reasons, but also by representatives of the civil society and other groupings within Turkey that are aspiring democrats, because only prospects of full membership gives the EU leverage on developments, and it creates a structure of incentives that can be actively used and useful to those affected. On the other hand, full membership is not in the cards for most EU countries, and then things starts to become problematic. So then what? Then what could you offer? I was noticing, and I was writing a piece for CIPRI the other week about the extent to which, at the time of the most recent summit of the European Council, where there was also plans for them to decide on sanctions, but there was that was counteracted, especially under German resistance movement within the EU, being proponents of a more cautious line. So instead, they were making a sort of last-ditch attempt, I don't know if last-ditch is the right word, to find an accommodation with Turkey on a relationship which would be based on the same things that were discussed in connection with the migration crisis, namely a larger package, where the prospect of full membership would be revived, which is very hard for European capitals to accept, where the customs union would be upgraded, modernized, broadened, where there would be a visa liberalization regime introduced, and where the EU would offer Turkey financial support for it to take the responsibility to deal inside Turkey of those 3.6 million Syrian refugees that were seen to be stuck there. And in order to prevent them from crossing the Aegean into Greece and then up in the corridor into ending up in Sweden. So you have the migration link there, and you have the EU, even as late as this fall, again considering to offer Turkey those things which have been clearly seen to be unproductive. Visa liberalization not in the cards really, apparently, for most. And the customs union, yeah, that could be beneficial for both sides, but seem to be a benefit to the unpopular regime in Turkey, and hence and so forth. So there's a treading back and forth, and I don't think that anyone, and by the way, this was all means in order diplomatically to deal with the threat, otherwise to have to slap sanctions on Turkey over its aggressive activities, whether Turkey needs to defend its member states, Greece and Cyprus. So we'll see now about the upcoming summit in December. And the French minister was yesterday saying that it is now clear that more and more states are joining us in our willingness to meet this Turkish challenge with determination, i.e. sanctions. But this is a step in a long-term relations. It's not easy to formulate, but Turkey is not going away. Turkey is staying there. Turkey is still located where it is and will remain a key to so many things. It's one of the biggest challenges of the EU.
Yeah, and to bring back the question to what's the most important thing to keep an eye on in terms of the ball, I reminded myself about Bill Clinton's statement. It's the economy, stupid. But when I'm listening to you, I find that in this context, we need to remind people that we are talking about keeping an eye on the process, or a number of interlinked processes. It's not, when we discuss enlargement, for instance, not the end state of that that is most important for the European Union in terms of influence and power and bargaining chips and all that. It's a process towards membership. That's when you have an influence on the behavior of another country.
Yeah.
And if you cannot make the vision of a future European Union membership of Turkey credible, then of course you lose those bargaining chips.
When I say that Turkey is one of, or even the most important difficult challenge for the EU, because it is also related to the Turkey-US relationship, where the European position is somehow dependent on developments there. Because Turkey, for its historical reasons, resource needs reasons, they are actively involved in everything where, all issues of importance to the EU in its southern dimension, by way of military presence or otherwise being a very active player. Which means that either you try to make accommodation with this more active Turkey, or you try to push back on Turkey, and then of course you have an eye on the difference between the current regime in Turkey and Turkey more generally, and the fact that there is of course also you cannot push back a country altogether just because you don't like the regime too much. There is always this link. You will struggle, we will struggle, and that includes Sweden, struggle with the question of accommodation, appeasement, or determination and pushback in an increasingly complex relationship. That's my prognosis.
And this illustrates, I think, and that's my final word, that when you see the trend towards more geopolitical approach in the EU discourse and the European discourse at large, also the UK, this reflects the fact that it's not just a matter of helping other countries to achieve their interest and achieve their goals. With Turkey and its surroundings, it's a much more complex set of tools that need to be applied in order to manage the process.
We need to add also that there is also the NATO factor. Turkey has a full place at the tables of NATO. It has veto power. It's hugely tricky and important to deal with from a NATO perspective. That covers Sweden and Finland too.
Michael Salin, we are doing yet another podcast together. This is certainly not the first one. We have made quite a number of podcasts before, but before entering into that production and discussing what we're going to do today, just to introduce you, we are both associated with the CIPRI, of course. We are both having roles in the Royal Swedish Academy of War Sciences. You are also a distinguished associate fellow to the SUITS Institute, which is what? Can you spell out the acronym?
Stockholm University Institute of Turkey Studies.
Yes, and for good reason, because you have followed this for a very, very long time, since the 90s. You have been Sweden's ambassador to Turkey, you have been Sweden's ambassador to Serbia, you have worked as EU Special Representative in the Western Balkans, you have had roles in Sudan, etc., etc. So, not only been State Secretary for Defense in Sweden, but really had a particular eye for the region that we're going to discuss today in a broader sense. I should immediately share the screen to show those listening to us that there is a publication which we have been doing, we have produced together. If you go to the website of the Royal Swedish Academy of War Sciences, you scroll down the article here by the governor of the Academy. He introduces a book called Engulfed in Flames, which is our last product from a project we are doing right now. And you can even access the book and scroll through the book here. And if you go to the list of content, you will see that there is an item here called the Turkish variable. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the southern dimension of European security, and with particular emphasis on Turkey. And as I said before, this is not the first thing we do on Turkey. We have done audio podcasts, for instance, this one on SoundCloud, 7 or 8 different podcasts on where we have discussed us during the last year, the situation in and around Turkey and the southern dimension of European security. We have a similar YouTube channel where we have introduced the book and discussed the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, both in Swedish and in English. And there is a website here which we maintain, which includes quite a lot of documentation on this, because there are constant articles and books being published and it's difficult to catch up. So to help people situate themselves, we thought that it was important to put things on the web that people can look through themselves. Now, when I go to the topic of today's presentation, one can say that the first responsibility of governments, of course, is to prevent war and take up defense in depth, far away, if necessary, from borders, in order to prevent that the war takes place on their own territories. And of course, for that you need to keep the eye on the ball. The problem we have, Michael, which we have been discussing for now more than a year in these podcasts, is that there are so many balls up in the air at the same time, basically. And of course, people are focusing on situation in the US, they're focusing on the situation regarding COVID, they are discussing the situation as regards Russia, Ukraine, recently Nagorno-Karabakh. So why should they look at Turkey? This is a plaidoyer, I think, in this podcast, that yes, we do need to look at Turkey, because it's not just one Turkish variable. There are many Turkish variables here which go in different directions, to the southern Caucasus, down to Libya, Eastern Mediterranean, and over to Iran, Iraq, and Syria, of course, which we have described in the book. And you have promised to start by just giving us a first glimpse of the parameters that we are talking in general here, namely the questions relating to how we should see the situation. Maybe you could say 1 minute about that.
When you ask the basic question, what is Turkey, where is Turkey headed, one has to remind of the importance of Turkey given its history and its geographic location. As has been pointed out so many times, there is this east-west dimension to this, the Bosphorus dividing Asia with Europe, and the whole of Turkey providing a bridge in terms of various flows from Asia to Europe, not so much the other way around, but there is still that also. And then you have the north-south dimension, where Turkey combines with its territory the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea areas, and of course the Middle East also, via the Black Sea to Russia and Ukraine behind that. So you have an extraordinarily important location, which makes Turkey somehow indispensable as a partner for various global players. And there has been a struggle all along. There is also the fact that in realization of this and in realization of the Ottoman past of today's Turkey, you have the saying by Atatürk at the time, his famous slogan, "Peace at home, peace in the world," which has been interpreted to mean that the strategic choice of Turkey, given its history and its location, is that it cannot take steps ahead, forward, beyond the current borders established at the Lausanne Treaty in 1923, by the way, nor can it take any step back. So a strategic defensive in those two, defending the borders as they were established in 1923, has been the classical strategic line which compelled Turkey in the early 50s to apply for NATO membership, which was granted. It had something to do with the Korean War. It had something also to do with the Truman Doctrine, or how to prevent further Soviet expansion into the Balkans and in the direction south at the time. But this Atatürk line has become challenged now by the current regime and its position vis-a-vis issues pertaining to the region. So,
okay, so what are you saying, that here we have a NATO member, and of course we should mention that it's also, at least formally, a candidate to become a member of the European Union since a long time. It's a country with some 80 million inhabitants, I think.
83, yes.
And it has a second largest standing forces in NATO. So it's more than 500,000 men, if I understand correctly. So it's a considerable actor and a considerably important arena in various dimensions, as you just have said. So then look, I mean, I'm a bit intrigued by the notion of a Turkish variable, which you and I write about in this book. Actually, we could have it in plural if we want, because what you are outlining here is not one variable. It's how in Turkey, in the actor and arena around Turkey, you can identify several very important variables which sort of define the ball here. How and when you have your eyes on the ball, you need to have your eyes on these variables. So let's look at them. I mean, you have outlined to me when I was preparing for this podcast, you outlined for me 4 main parameters here. One, of course, the one that you just started to discuss briefly, namely the doctrine, how it's been developed since the father, Atatürk. You have the issue of balance, how Turkey balances between different actors. You have the issue of brinkmanship, how Turkey plays boldly now in a number of crucial arenas, one by one. And many people don't see the whole picture here, so we are trying to give the whole picture. And fourthly, what this means in terms of timeline and key factors as they occupy world attention today. So can we start with perhaps the doctrine issue? And if you want to, I have the keywords down here, there might be more of them. And you need to, I think, for our listeners and viewers, explain what the concepts mean, because they're not immediately obvious for people who are not experts.
Yeah. I would first defend the concept of the Turkish variable to be not so much arenas of Turkish activities in various neighboring countries, but the overall Turkish factor that other countries, I would say, increasingly have to relate to, although Turkey represents for them a huge dilemma nowadays in various ways, which we'll come back into. So if we have this coherent concept of the Turkish variable or factor, but variable implies also that a variable can be dependent or independent, where the Turkey factor is either the cause of things or the effect of other things, so to speak. So you have that concept. But on the doctrine side, I did mention the Atatürk line, peace at home, peace in the world, which incidentally was referred to by some short statement during the attempted coup night in 2016, before that coup attempt was crushed, as if either genuinely or ingenuinely wanting the intention to restore basic principles of Atatürk rather than to represent the preacher Fethullah Gülen's preachings, as has been alleged ever since. So you have that traditional line, and then you have also the fact that Atatürk, after all, was the founder of today's Turkey, which had its basis and its roots in the Ottoman Empire, where the Sultan was in Istanbul, and the Turkic factor was very strong in the whole region, having been on the losing side in the First World War, and in the ruins, therefore, of the loss in that war, and also the crumbling of the Sultanate and the Ottoman Empire. Atatürk, in those ruins, created a new Turkey, which strongly emphasized Turkey under his principles, wanting to become a Western country, and therefore to be a secular society. Secularism defined rather similarly to contemporary France, by the way, laicity, separating strongly between church and state, or religion and state affairs, which in the context of Turkey and its overwhelmingly Islamic culture is a very controversial thing to do. So you have the foreign policy strategic defensive, you have the balancing act, and you have the secular Kemalist teachings of Atatürk. And from those roots, you have Erdogan, the current president, who came to power after reforming a formerly clearly Islamist political party into a modern pro-European, pro-EU party, AKP, and then gradually transforming it into today's situation where Erdogan is conducting policies which are much less secularist, much more Islamist, and much more internationally aggressive or assertive in the region. So there is a long trend. We can talk a long time about this evolution from Atatürk to Erdogan. Part of this is connected to the concept of irredentism. The word as a term means an urge to recover lost territory. And of course, if the point of departure is Ottomanism or the Ottoman Empire, where the Istanbul regime controlled large parts of the region, including northern Iraq and parts of Syria and what have you, all the way down to Yemen, by the way. It is noted and often referred to also as a reason for today's conduct of more aggressive foreign policy to redeem lost territories compared to the Ottoman Empire. So you have that component. Another component then often referred to is neo-Ottomanism and also pan-Islamism. Islam in this case being Sunni Islam, contrary to Shia Islam dominated by Iran. But also, as we know, within Sunni you have the various branches, and in the case of the model of Islam conducted by or conceived by the regime in Ankara, it is close to the so-called Muslim Brotherhood branch of Sunni Islam. And neo-Ottomanism, of course, is restoring either rhetorically or practically the glory of the old and the extent of dominance that Istanbul could conduct in those times.
So I mean, Mikael, so yeah. That means that what happened after the Arab Spring or Arab uprisings, whatever you call it, was a big disappointment for Erdogan. You mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. Erdogan had hoped that it would have been much more successful in establishing itself in Egypt and other countries.
Well, that was a reason why Turkey, not least under the then Foreign Minister Davutoglu, who was a scholar who has developed those concepts, seeing the Arab Spring as an opening for more active Turkish foreign policies compared to the Ottoman line. And then, as you say, there was the counterwave, which was a disappointment for Turkey. Assad did not fall immediately to the Muslim Brotherhood dominated Sunni majority uprising in Syria. Rather, the whole thing became a protracted tragedy. And similarly in Egypt, the coming to power of the Muslim Brotherhood through the name of Morsi was ousted in the summer of 2013, which coincided, by the way, in time with the uprising on a different basis in Turkey. So yes, you have a series of disappointments compared to expectations at the time. But even today, you can say that in spite of those disappointments, to some extent, caused by these disappointments, the contemporary, very active Turkish foreign policy has everything to do with those disappointments.
Yeah,
I should have added also from your foreign picture that the factor of the Kurds.
I just wanted to go back to the map there, Mika, because I think you might wish to tell our viewers that the Kurdish issue is much more than Turkey, so to say. I just want to show the map. So you have the Kurds in Turkey, of course. You have them in Syria. You have them in Iraq. You have them even to a certain extent in the Caucasus and in Iran, don't you?
Yes.
And a large diaspora. So it's a huge issue.
It's the biggest nation or people that never got its own state. Yeah, is a phrase sometimes used. Maybe there is competition, but so much of the dynamics of the region, also after not least after the Arab Spring, has everything to do with the struggle between pan-Kurdish forces and the counter forces to that, led by Turkey, being afraid of the irredentism, so to speak, of Kurds.
Yeah.
In view of their dominance in southeastern Turkey, in view of their dominance in northern Syria, in view of their dominance also in northern Iraq. Less dominance in other countries, but still in those parts of contemporary countries, they are a significant factor. And there is a need for historical deal between the current states and the aspiration for statehood by Kurds, and especially the case of Turkey in this regard is a key, because the struggle that has had its ups and downs ever since 1984. It's incredibly important to the understanding also of the prospects of democracy and rule of law and human rights in Turkey itself.
Yeah, and maybe we should also mention there that there is not only a strong link through NATO to the United States from Turkey, but there is also a strong link from the Kurds in different countries, including notably in Iraq. I mean, and the United States, and the specific protection that the United States has provided to the Kurds in northern parts of Iraq, etc., etc. So it's not what Kissinger would call a balanced triangle. So it's a very very unstable and difficult triangle to balance for the United States as well, I suppose.
Because Kurds have been seen by the US in its problematic Middle East policies to be partners in the struggles, first with Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, and then against the Assad regime in Syria, where clearly Kurds have been seen as net assets and partners in those struggles, complicated as these are. In the case of Turkey, it's a little more difficult because there has been an armed struggle ever since 1984, in turn resulting from the military coup in Turkey at that time and the reaction to that. And of course, that has meant that Turkish foreign policy has had as a main objective to have other countries accept to stamp the PKK, the organization representing armed resistance to the government of Turkey, as a terrorist organization. So that has been one thing, but there has been periods also of reconciliation talks, and the most recent one, which went very far at the time when President Erdogan felt that he would be able and willing to finally provide a solution to the Kurdish issue in Turkey before it broke down, partly as a result of conflicts in neighboring Syria. So everything is somehow connected in a very complicated way, but for the West, the Kurdish issue has always been a complicator in its relations with Turkey.
Yeah, So if we look more carefully now at the different parts of the variable here, you started by outlining the fact that, and I actually added Ukraine here. I just read an article today about military cooperation in drone development between Ukraine and Turkey, and things are happening here which are for many incredible in this sense. And maybe you want to mention it, but you have a balancing act here, US, NATO, EU, Ukraine, and Russia. And many people have, of course, difficulty to keep a clear eye on what does this mean? Is it a stable balance, or is it a constant shifting balance?
I think one should, this by the way is a very good picture. One should look upon this question from the point of view of the Western countries, and then from the point of view of Turkey separately, in a way, because balance is in the eyes of the beholder in terms of definition. But clearly, Turkey has always been seen as being as important as problematic in many ways because of its size and because of its location, but also in view of its ethnic, religious, etc. Composition. Turkey is not only large and with, as we said before, 83, 84 or so million inhabitants, but they are nowadays 99% Muslim country. It wasn't like that in the 20s when Atatürk formed his new Turkey. There was a sizable population in the southeast, which was Christian. The Syriacs there was a Greek population there, and there were Armenians in the survivors from the Holocaust, or whatever you call it, the events in 1915. So the sheer composition of Turkey, with a clear tendency in recent decades to become more and more Islamic in composition. And then, of course, you have the government also being more Islamist as a policy. So you have that, which makes it an odd bird within NATO, I mean, Turkey. So again, you have an illustration that importance coincides with being problematic. Similarly, of course, for the EU to have the mighty Turkey, Islamic country, become a member of the EU club is not easy for anyone, especially not certain countries in Europe. But whenever there is hesitation on those grounds, then of course it is used in Turkey as a propaganda item, criticizing the EU for being a Christian club which doesn't welcome others. Although in the case of many European countries, Islam is clearly the second biggest religion. That applies, by the way, to Sweden too, as Ingmar Carlsson has pointed out. Yes.
Michael, can I interject there? I mean, for those who are interested in the way ahead for the EU, I think you need to mention here, from that perspective, that the EU clearly in later years are continuing its road towards majority voting. It goes in the direction of supranationalism based on majority voting, where not every member state has a veto on what is happening. Now, we know right now, as we have the struggle over the Corona package and the multi-annual financial perspective in the EU, that individual countries try to find a way to put a veto on the way ahead. But in reality, what is very important is how many votes you have. So here you have a crucial balancing problem for the EU. Taking in a country with 80 million inhabitants definitely means a shift in the balance of votes, both in the European Parliament and of course in the Council itself. So it's it's increasingly a utopist proposal to bring in Turkey. Still, many countries, including Sweden, of course, insist that this is the way we should look at things, the development through the future.
There is a lingering belief on the part of several countries that only through credible enlargement policies can there be a viable European Union. I think that position has been weakened, but it's hard to admit that this is in fact a weakening case, because enlargement has been seen as a twin concept to deepening of ties. There must be some kind of link. But clearly the case of Turkey represents a final test to those questions and their validity and viability. I really think so. But if you have Turkey on the one hand going increasingly authoritarian in its domestic policies, and a Turkey which is also seeing its economic base after the first 10 years of huge success economically in the early years of the AKP and Erdogan regime. And then a Turkey that has been more assertive based on expectations, as you said, from the Arab Spring and the openings for a more active role in the Middle East, but also seeing that an ambitious regime being less tempted to be taking orders from Washington and Brussels when defining its interests and when conducting its policies, and therefore finding itself involved in the art of balancing, such that the issue now is very much how should NATO look upon Turkey when Turkey is in an acute conflict, although not military, but certainly political, with neighboring Greece over issues pertaining to the demarcation lines in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean Sea areas, and a situation when therefore Greece is rearming. I read yesterday that they are acquiring for purchase both of French Rafale and US F-35 planes to balance its military might against the mightier Turkey, which, as you say, is NATO's second biggest. But the Turkish army has been heavily influenced also by the coup attempt in 2016 and the purges following it, such that they hardly have pilots for all of their planes in the F-16 fleet that they have. So that also is part of this balancing game. And also concerning Russia, after all, Russia is a neighboring country, but Turkey is very dependent on supplies of gas through the Black Sea from Turkey. Turkey is a builder, although it is in question now, of Turkey's first nuclear power plant in the southern coast. And Turkey has chosen, for a host of reasons stated, to go for a Russian-made air defense system, S-400, which is seen to be incompatible with the NATO equipment otherwise, and certainly if they were to have continued as a partner with the F-35 plane project, from which they have since been expelled. And as you say in this picture also, in this overall balancing game, which has components of real brinkmanship, there is also balancing Ukraine and Russia, the two big neighbors at the Black Sea. And for all the cooperation between Russia and Turkey nowadays in Syria and elsewhere, and over these big supply questions, there has been parallel been a development of relations between Ukraine and Turkey, and defense agreement between Ukraine and Turkey, which should be observed with some concern in Moscow. So you have a Turkey more forward-leaning, having decided to promote by force, by determination at least, its interest, and in doing so has found itself in conflict not only with neighbors but also with its traditional allies and the new part allies, Russia and Ukraine. And this is where we are right now.
And the fascinating thing, when we look at it as a question, is illustrated by today's news or the news of the latest days. If you look at the Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the latest discussion, a very dramatic and moving situation from a humanitarian perspective. What you have here with Nagorno-Karabakh is one example of the many cases of brinkmanship that you have outlined in our small book, Engulfed in Flames. A fifth case, if you like, in addition to the ones that we outline in the book. There, right now, to take the absolute latest news that I saw this morning, you have the Ulyanovsk Brigade from the Russian Federation, a 2,000 highly trained special forces entering as a peacekeeping entity into the Nagorno-Karabakh scene, now being complemented by a Turkish expressed desire also to provide peacekeeping troops from its large standing forces to the area. First place, of course, the Azeri, from the Azeri position, the Azeri, and sharing some sort of coordination role there. Is this what we call peacekeeping? Is maybe the first question one might put, but it clearly illustrates the enormous developments here that we hardly possible to believe that we have waited for such a long time for something to happen down there in Nagorno-Karabakh since the mid-90s, basically. We expected something to happen, but did we expect this to happen? So maybe you can run through quickly or not so quickly if you find the interesting things to say in addition to what we already said in the book, so to say. But I mean, I find this must, I think, ring the bell for many people, that we are not just talking about the static situation down there, so to say, which is managed by people which have no specific relationship to our security.
I should then begin by saying that the Turkish parliament, which has been really weakened since the Turkish constitutional changes introducing the presidential system with Erdogan as the sole voice of power, but they welcomed technically or allowed technically yesterday for sending Turkish troops to Nagorno-Karabakh upon invitation by Azerbaijan. My recollection from my time in the Ministry of Defense in the early 90s is that the concept of having Russians or the Russian then continuation of the Soviet Union, you remember with this, it was called OSS at the time, was a competition rather with ideas within the Minsk group for the OSCE to be the provider of peacekeeping troops whenever there should be a demand for and an opening for that as part of a solution to the warfare happening in the early 90s. So I'm not entirely surprised that it all ended up in Russia being the player of this. In the case of Turkey now, the interesting thing is that clearly Turkey helped Azerbaijan militarily win this war, if winning is defined as having more or less reoccupied the occupied territories surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh, and even chipping off part of Nagorno-Karabakh proper, and then you have the Lachin corridor connecting Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia proper, and then you have the issue which has been discussed over the years of how to connect the Nakhchivan exclave between Turkey and then on via that territory with the corridor to Azerbaijan proper. So you have a situation in that region with a disconnect between various national and regional aspirations. I am surprised that it should have been so impossible over so many years to find a more lasting solution. On the other hand, it's a classical case, Lars-Erik, of a war ending up with one party winning and the other. At that time, it was the Armenian side, with discreet help from the West, winning against the disorderly Azeri troops at the time, leaving post World War I kind of perceived unfairness, and clearly paving the way for revanchist forces on the one side and defensive tendencies on the other side. One side really wanting to, making it a national existence necessity to recover lost territories, and for the other side to at all costs defend the gains of the war at large cost. So it's a classical thing. How do you find compromise in conflicts like this when the goals of the two sides are 100% incompatible? So now we have this, and the Russians were not pleased with the new prime minister in Armenia, so they somehow sat on their hands, not doing much, allowing instead Turkey to be the intervening party on the side of the Azeris, not least using a new Turkish drone technology to make the situation militarily untenable for the Armenian and the Nagorno forces. And then finally the Russians intervened, having taken so much time as a means of punishing the in Moscow unpopular prime minister, but also preventing the Azeris from winning totally, recovering the whole of Nagorno-Karabakh and maybe even threatening Armenia proper. But apparently Russia was not willing to allow Turkey to be part of the peacekeeping force as such, but they have, as a compromise, invited Turkey to send some more reduced force in order to be observing the center operations for the Russian peacekeeping activities. So that's where we are now. And it has given rise to an international discussion. So who is the winner and who's the loser of the war?
Yeah, well, what I'm told by military experts that I've been talking with is that we are likely to see a lot of articles being written about this war, in addition to what we have already seen, the Caspian Sea being a launching base for missiles directed to the Syrian theater. We have the question of private military, which we have not had as a major issue here yet, but the private military groups like Wagner Group and others being used in Syria and Libya. And now on top of this, we have these suicidal drones, so to say, which are sort of completely changing the assumptions probably on the Armenian side, that they could hide, in the mountains or whatever. You could use the terrain, which is very difficult to protect yourself. And so we are getting close to the discussion we had in the Golan in the past about 0-1 effects, that new technology is, and it's not just conventional technology. I suppose we are talking about very high level, and that we now also have cooperation between Turkey and the Ukraine. Things are happening here which indicate that we are talking about a much more dynamic battlefield than we saw, for instance, in the Balkans 15 or 20 years ago.
I need to add here, Lars-Erik, that the case you mentioned drones, which is a hugely important thing, where Turkey has had an advanced industrial development. It's based on Western technology, but still somehow national Turkish application, which they have been using in their various wars, and you have the sketch here. But it's also the fact that Turkey, with its campaign against the radical Kurds, the PKK, in Turkey itself, and in the mountainous areas of northern Iraq, they have had an element of practical training using drones in such a way which is something adding to the pure technology. Using drones as a warfare instrument, changing the scene in various ways, has been hugely important also in its application in Nagorno-Karabakh area, because they have a lot of training of active use, lethal use in the various war scenes in Syria. Turkey also, as we have seen, is accused of or seen to have been using Syrian mercenaries also in the war zone of Nagorno-Karabakh and this area, like in Libya. So there is drones and there are mercenaries, which have been instruments of power projection by Turkey.
And on top of that, we have, again, I think it's worth repeating for those of us who follow the Swedish defense debate and what the number of people that we are talking about in European armed forces. We are talking about a more or less standing army in Russia of 700,000-800,000 people. And we have a standing army in Turkey of more than 500,000 people. So we're talking about large, again, very large forces that support these rather new and technologically advanced methods of warfare.
Still, that large army, as you say, is being depleted, or at least risks overextending, since it is being used in southeastern Turkey, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in the Eastern Mediterranean on the naval side, in Libya, although there are now peace talks, and definitely in northern Iraq. So it is large, but it's also overextended, and the costs of all those warfares, although each being minor but still lethal, is in the order of $50 billion or so, meaning depleting the Turkish economy further.
And we come back to the economy in just a short while, but when you look at these 5 arenas or engagement areas, can we say that there is a stable outcome in sight in any of these 5 areas? Or is Turkey forced to plan for a further investment into trying to protect its interests in all these 5 areas for the unforeseeable future?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't think there is a clear answer to that. The aim of all those interventions, which are historically unthinkable if you compare with the doctrine of Atatürk, for example, having Turkish lethal presence, not only, by the way, in these areas where there has been or is open conflict, but also there is a Turkish military presence in Somalia, in Qatar, and elsewhere, representing expansionism of power projection more generally. The aim is regime establishment, regime consolidation, but also promotion of a Turkish say in the salons of global diplomacy. a request from Turkey to be respected as a counterpart, interlocutor, whenever important decisions are being made. So insisting on relevance by fiscal force in a way. But it's also brinkmanship, as the title states. And for me, I am curious to see whether Erdogan as president will actually succeed, because those interventions have had everything to do also, of course, with regime consolidation at home. Lack of legitimacy or reduced legitimacy at home because of economic hardships and harshness over human rights have made it necessary to have a sort of an international adventurous line to enhance popularity. You have this aspect also. But there is no facet in these conflicts, and I think that Turkey really, for want of a capability to step back and to compromise, we'll see now with Biden coming in as a factor, whether there will be a willingness on the side of Turkey to make concessions. But for an autocrat that many see Erdogan as, compromise is hard. So one risks being stuck where one is, because you cannot risk defeat, because defeat is impossible to combine with the regime consolidation. So you have all those factors playing in there.
So we look at it now from a timeline and factor perspective. You just mentioned Biden, clearly to a certain extent an unknown from the Turkish side. I don't think that anyone really knows what a Biden administration will do exactly. We don't know how much the EU will build up a united perspective. They are supporting the Greek views on some of these issues that we hinted to. We didn't have time to go into them in detail before. And you mentioned also the economy. Maybe you could say a word about, I mean, clearly what the Americans, what the EU does do in terms of the economic situation as well. And there is an agreement on the migration issue, etc. There are many economic variables here which also go into the picture. And you said that there is an overextension on the military side. So what does this mean? And you have mentioned in your outline to me about this podcast also the issue of the anniversary that you might wish to discuss.
Yeah. Okay, let me give it a try. The anniversary thing is 2023. That's 100 years anniversary of the formation of today's Turkey. Atatürk's creation, turning more and more Erdoganist, as we have seen. And in view of this, already in 2011, then Prime Minister Erdogan coined the term the New Turkey, Yeni Turkey, and defined it to be the goal before the anniversary, that by the time of the anniversary, Turkey, for example, should have become or entered the top 10 of world economies. At the time of the coining of that term, the New Turkey to be established at the time of the anniversary, the regime, the AKP regime, had multiplied domestic product per capita from $2,000 to $10,000, which was an incredible achievement, partly as a result of the rapprochement with the EU at the time. So there is parallelism here. Now, of course, things have become much, much more complicated, such that as we speak now, Lars-Erik, the GDP per capita is less than what it was before 2010. And Turkey is the 19th of the world economies, just making it for the G20 club, with threats of being out of that team as well. Now, this is a long story, but they have been adding a negative curve in recent years, and the Turkish lira, for example, has you would have to pay 3 liras for US dollar only 3-4 years ago, and today it has been even down to 8.5 liras for US dollars, meaning that the Turkish lira has lost. It has lost 30% or so of its value even this year only. Meaning, of course, and also in view of the fact that Turkey has financed its GDP growth to a large extent by foreign loans for the construction industry, building up the fancy city suburbs of Istanbul and Ankara and all those things, and this has created a debt bubble from the corporate side. So there are many things which makes the Turkish economy weaker than most even emerging economies. But it has also made Turkey extremely dependent on investors in Europe and the financial market dominated by the US. And this is what has made the uncertainties over US relations with Turkey so sensitive. And now that you have Biden coming in, Biden apparently has no direct personal link to Erdogan, as Trump did have for reasons largely unknown. And there are several sanctions being agreed upon in Congress, stopped only by the executive of Trump for the time being. And you have the S-400 issue, you have the large Turkish bank being threatened by sanctions as well, a Halk Bank, and you have the Armenian genocide issue. You have a whole portfolio.
And what about the nuclear issue? I mean,
what about the nuclear issue? That is a less prevalent thing, but under the principle of nuclear sharing, as you know, there has been storage of B-61 bombs at the Incirlik base in Turkey, southeast. That base has been controversial in many ways. The base commander was linked to the coup attempt in 2016, which meant that the base turned closed for 24 hours before things were clarified at the time. It is also it has been the indispensable base for operations into Syria and Iraq from NATO and from the US. So there are many things here, but also a debate, both general nuclear sharing debate, but also specific Turkey debate about whether it's reasonable for the US to keep those bombs, nuclear bombs, in that base. So why are they there if they cannot be used anyway? Because the Turkish F-16 fleet is not capable of transporting them. So there are huge issues there. I don't see them as acute for the time being, but there are other things between the US and Turkey that are acute, and where the entry of Biden threatens Turkey with a significant deterioration, because there will be no longer a Trump personal blocking factor concerning the S-400 and concerning sanctions generally. So huge opening there.
And COVID and the indirect effects of COVID, tourism and all that.
Yeah, and then you have the factor of COVID, which in turn has affected tourism. Tourism is a hugely important sector of the Turkish economy in the $50 billion or so order. And of course, the COVID thing has reduced tourism a lot. The wave of terrorist acts in Turkey in 2015, 16, 17 also reduced, and the conflict between Turkey and Russia at the time, when Turkey shot down a Russian S-24 plane on the border with Syria. All those things has made the otherwise extremely booming Turkish climate oriented, because the Turkish climate is excellent for tourism sector booming. So you have now huge threats to tourism to the Turkish economy, making it even more vulnerable also to sanctions threats from its Western partners. And I have mentioned the threat of US sanctions. We'll see what Biden will bring. But there is also discussion, as late as yesterday, there was further mention of EU sanctions proposed actively by France. The French EU minister was speaking in a podcast about the imminence of such EU sanctions over the Turkish activities in the Eastern Mediterranean, where Turkey has been acting to be, in a way, perceived to be aggressive, because Turkey feels that it needs to change the status quo that has been established in terms of ownership of the issues that go all the way back to the Lausanne Treaty, when the borders were drawn between Greece and Turkey. But you have also the festering Cyprus question. Erdogan yesterday visited the ghost town Varosha, which was a touristic attraction at the time. It's been standing empty since the Turkish invasion in 1974. And now Erdogan is there, and they have opened this town in defiance of the UN declaration, which has stated that Varosha will be part of a larger deal, cannot be solved by one-sided imposition. But the situation in Cyprus is now such that the new prime minister, the new president, together with Turkey, are proposing a two-state solution, which is unacceptable to the Greek side. So there are many such issues poisoning the atmosphere also between the EU and Turkey. And the foreign ministers of France and Germany yesterday published an article where they are talking about the need to deal with determination with aggressive acts by Turkey. So you have a negative trend right now, which will see major changes. But in response to those, you see also a lot of Turkish active imposition of military force, trying to defend and promote its interests by active force.